Welcome back. Despite the fact that no new infections of polio disease have been reported in New Zealand for over 5 decades, the effects can still be felt. Central News spoke to Ms. Jega about her quest for awareness.
I work as a senior physiotherapist at a hospital in Perth in Western Australia. The name is Royal Perth Hospital Shenton Park Campus. Now we are a specialised rehab unit, and I've worked for over 35 years in acquired brain injury. Now it's only by chance that I went into late effects disability because the Polio Association Australia in Western Australia came to the hospital with a complaint that two things, that when they go to physiotherapists with a complaint, they actually come away worse than when they went in. So the exercises they were given, the therapy they were given made them worse. Then they go to the GP and the GP says it's all in your mind. Or if they had a paralytic polio version, the GP would tell them just be prepared to go into a wheelchair. So they came to the hospital saying, look, can someone set up a clinic? And I put my hand up only because I had, in my head injury ward, the last of the iron lung polio victims on my ward, called Paul Berry. When he acquired his polio, he lost the use of his arms and most of his breathing muscles, and he had the use of his legs. Now, he used to be a fairly well-known foot painter. He used to hold a brush in his feet and paint. So what I did was, and I saw him deteriorate. I couldn't intervene. I just learned. Every time I saw him, for example, when I saw him he stopped painting, and I said, why did you not paint? He said, I can't hold the brush anymore. I said, oh yeah. Then I saw him in a scooter. I said, why aren't you walking? My legs are too weak, I'm afraid to fall. So I learned after the fact. So by the time he passed away, I couldn't help him with the knowledge he gave me. But I thought at least I had a start. And in my ward, we also used to do cerebral palsy patients. And again, they also had similar late effects needs. And with 35 years of head injury, I used to see patients come back to see me. And I noticed that after 10 years, they had different needs from an acute intervention. So all of that in my mind felt there was something to this. So, I went and looked into it, researched, and we put our hand up to set the clinic. Polio New Zealand heard about us in a conference. And they asked me to come over in 2008, and I gave a series of talks there, and they found that of value to their client base. So they invited me back again. This time, not only to talk to the different pockets, because in New Zealand, like Western Australia, you have a tyranny of distance, but not by size, but by your mountains. Where in Western Australia, we've got 1,000 kilometers between one city to the other. Here, you've got big mountains. So you still have a cluster of people in different communities. And they were asked me whether I would go from small groupings to talk, and this time I've targeted my lecture around self-management, because most of them, even in Perth and here, cannot access a physiotherapist easily because of distance. So this time I geared it to if I could tell them about self-management, at least that's a starter, and I've got a second interest in coming. A clinic is so easy to set up, certainly from the physiotherapist perspective. A late effects of disability polio clinic is very easy to set up. And I just need to sell that idea to my physiotherapy colleagues. So the other arm of coming here, Polio New Zealand has done a great job of public relations exercise, trying to get people to come and listen. And so my job is the selling of it.
So tell us about post-polio syndrome and how it differs from polio.
What is known, and it's really hypothetical what happened, because essentially polio is supposed to be eradicated. There are a cluster of places where the wild virus still exists, but smaller than before. So people don't assume that polio has been healed as such. So at the onset, there was a massive, it went like epidemic, so people were isolated, farms were isolated. When the SARS, can you remember that when the swine virus and the SARS happened? Everybody wore masks, everybody was isolated. In the polio epidemic, it was a little bit more cruel than that. They took babies away from families, totally put them in isolation, almost 6 months to 1 to 2 years, some of them. And they isolated communities, they left bread at the end of the driveway. It's truly an epidemic proportion. So there was a huge panic. Of those affected, everybody had a high fever. Many at onset could not move their limbs, one or more of their limbs. Some went on to full paralysis. Could be one limb, could be one muscle, could be 2 limbs. It hit differently. Others recovered full use of their legs. In the subsequent years, they're carrying on with life, They built up, some built up muscle. Those with paralysis obviously built up the better leg, the one that was working. Those who didn't have any paralysis so just seemed to have built up bigger muscles than was normal for the population. And in late effects, then in sort of 15 to 10, 20 years' time, they started to feel symptoms, but they just still pushed on. But at 35, 40 years, they actually came to a halt almost, so it became a disability, whereas before it was something they just lived with. Now, what happened to them as a child caused a disability, and it affected them massive amount of fatigue. Early morning, they could work. By evening, they were washed out. They did activity one day, the next day they couldn't move. Some of them can't move for the next 2 days. Muscle weakness, a new muscle weakness, and that weakness caused a lot of panic because it mimicked the type of weakness they had when they first had polio. Massive amount of joint pain, muscle pain, loss of balance. And when you have that combination, then it affects your function. You can't even, you can't get up out of bed to look after yourself, look after your home, look after your garden. So functional disability started to set in. Then there are other associated symptoms that may be common with other diseases like sleep apnea and multiple rheumatoid arthritic sort of presentation, fibromyalgia type problem. Breathing difficulties also were common. So a cluster of symptoms that are common worldwide. Anywhere, if you Google polio late effects, what comes up is similar to everywhere, anywhere in the world. From my side of the world to New Zealand, same complaints.
To find out more about polio and post-polio syndrome, head to polio.org.nz.